Oh, all right. Thank you, Ted. I believe we still have the poll up, so as folks are coming in, if you're able to take a quick moment to respond, that would be great. Otherwise, I'm guessing Ted will be closing it in a couple of seconds. In the meantime, while a few of you might be doing that, we'll get things started. So again, hello, everyone. Good afternoon, or I guess maybe good morning to some, depending upon where you're joining us from today. My name is Portia Brower. I am the Director of Audit Operations within the LSC's Office of Inspector General. I'd like to welcome you to this year's presentation on enhancing the rigor and reliability of LSC grantee financial statement audits. Some of you joined us for a similar presentation last year, but for those of you who are new, again, welcome. This is a presentation highlighting the findings and recommendations identified and issued during our annual and most recent quality control reviews of select LSC recipient audits. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Meliza Ella and Carol Bates, audit managers, and senior auditors, Andrew Hensel and Ted Michalek. Ted is serving as our meeting facilitator this afternoon, and he, along with Carol, are monitoring the chat for any questions that may arise during the presentation. We will hear from both Meliza and Andrew later. Before we get started, a couple of reminders for any who might have missed it earlier. So this presentation is being recorded. A copy of the slide deck for today's presentation, as well as the related audit advisory, will be uploaded to the Zoom chat box. So this is for your convenience or ease of future reference following the presentation. Lastly, you're free to post any questions you have about today's presentation in the chat. We seem to have a pretty well-attended presentation this afternoon, so we respectfully ask that you keep your microphones muted. We'll revisit those questions in the end, and I suppose with that, let's get started. Let me just shift some things around a little bit. So again, what gives us the honor of hosting today's presentation? If you joined us last year, we focused on the results of our latest quality control review cycle and introduced the long-awaited, at the time, update to our OIG audit guide and compliance supplement. This year, we're looking forward to sharing a brief overview of both our desk review and quality control review processes. We'll close out the presentation by sharing the most common issues identified during this year's QCR cycle of LSC grantee financial statement audits. We'll also share actionable recommendations that we hope will not only prevent future occurrences of the issues we found, but also improve audit quality in the long run. So today's agenda includes an introduction to the OIG's Office of Audits and the role it plays in executing the OIG's mission. In doing so, Meliza is going to share an overview of the desk reviews we conduct of grantee financial statement audits. Andrew will then walk you through the results of the QCRs conducted this cycle, including a summary of the findings and recommendations identified by the audit firm we contract with to conduct those audits. Let's see. We'll close out with a list of resources that we hope are helpful to you guys in the future, and we'll open the floor for any questions you might have related to today's presentation. There are several ways in which the Office of Audit works to execute its mission. These include, but certainly aren't limited to, conducting audits of both LSC and the legal aid organizations known as its grantees. These audits are required by law and in accordance with the IG Act as well as the LSC Act. We also perform desk reviews of all grantee financial statement audits conducted by the independent public accounting firms that serve them. And to further our efforts, we conduct quality control reviews of a selection of those financial statement audits. We also provide guidance such as the LSC OIG audit guide, which includes what I referenced earlier, the recently updated OIG compliance supplement. And I suppose it might be helpful to make the distinction that desk reviews that we conduct are focused but somewhat limited in scope. They're performed in-house by those of us in the Office of Audits and are conducted for all of LSC's over 130 grantees. While the OIG oversees the process, performance of the quality control reviews are contracted outside of the Office of Audits, and they entail a more thorough and rigorous review of the audit documentation that actually supports the conclusions that are made during those audits of the grantees. So now what I'll do is I'll pass the presentation to Meliza, who's going to walk you through our desk review process. Meliza, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Portia. I'm waiting for the slide. There you go. Thank you. So this slide here provides the reasons on why we perform desk reviews. So we perform them to make sure audits are accurate and follow applicable standards, to catch problems early before they escalate, to make sure funds are used properly through identifying audits for quality control reviews, to notify LSC management on issues that require their attention. In this process, we also provide feedback and help grantees improve for future audits. So, a few months ago, we conducted desk reviews for audits from fiscal year ending 2023. As we worked through these reports, certain patterns began to emerge. Some things were done well, while others revealed room for improvement. Today, I'll walk you through the most common observations from these reviews and explain why they matter. These observations aren't just about following rules, right? They impact how well grantees manage their funding and meet their missions. Our goal is to help identify and fix these problems early so grantees stay compliant, protect their funding, and focus on providing essential services to their communities. I'll also share practical tips on how you, as IPAs, can support these efforts to ensure future audits run smoothly. Next slide, please. So we also rate our desk reviews. Ratings give us a snapshot of whether the audit meets the required standards or if any improvements are needed. If a report does not receive an acceptable rating, we follow up with the auditor and the grantee to provide feedback and work on any corrections. This helps everyone stay on track for future audits and ensures compliance. Next slide. So here are some common observations from our desk reviews. First is inadequate property presentation. Grantees don't always clearly separate property purchase with LSC funds from other funding sources. So how can you help? Check that property purchased with LSC funds is reported separately from non-LSC funded property in the financial statements. Review whether assets are properly categorized by funding source and ensure that the depreciation and other relevant details are reported accurately for each category. Second is inaccurate deferred revenue reporting. Deferred revenue wasn't always properly reported by grant type. So how can you help? Ensure deferred revenue is reported by grant type even if the balance is zero. Double check that they are following this rule and note any discrepancies in your audit findings. Third is LSC grants not reported separately. Some grantees group multiple LSC grants together instead of reporting them separately. So how can you help? Make sure grantees are listing each LSC grant separately in their reports, even if the balances are small or zero. Clearly distinguish different types of grants, for example, basic field, migrant, or native, in the financial statements. During these audits, verify that each grant is listed with its corresponding expenditures and revenues. And last but definitely not the least, unallowable use of LSC funds. Some grantees may misuse LSC funds by transferring them to a non-allowable program or activities, which can lead to compliance issues. So how can you help? Review all fund transfers carefully to ensure they comply with LSC regulations and flag any below the line transfers, including questionable transactions for review. Being diligent about fund transfers help protect the grantees and ensures funds are used for their intended purpose. So, as I've mentioned earlier, some audits reflected strong practices while others revealed areas that need attention. The common observations we discussed today show how small oversights can have a big impact on compliance and funding. Our message: your role as IPAs is essential in identifying these issues early and guiding grantees toward solutions. By staying proactive, familiarizing yourself with LSC guidelines, and following up on flag concerns, you can help grantees avoid future problems and stay focused on their mission. If we all care, together, we can ensure audits are accurate, funds are used properly, and LSC grantees remain strong in serving their communities. With that, I'll pass it over to Portia, who will walk us through the QCR processes.
Thank you, Meliza. So now that everyone's had a sense of what our desk review process looks like, I'll spend a few moments walking you through our QCR process. Ultimately, the purpose of conducting the quality control reviews is really quite simple. We're looking to make sure that the work of the IPA firms that are contracted by LSC grantees adhere to applicable audit standards as well as LSC and OIG guidelines. As we shared earlier, currently the QCRs are conducted by a CPA firm contracted by the OIG, McBride, Locke and Associates. This firm is intimately familiar with the OIG's guidelines and applicable audit standards. To offer a bit of insight into our selection process, we aim to review each grantee and their IPA at least once every 4 to 5 years. The timing of the selections are largely based on the grantees. So, for instance, if an IPA happens to audit multiple LSC recipients, they may have more frequent QCRs than other IPA firms. Overall, we take a risk-based approach to selecting which IPAs and grantees will be reviewed each year. And those factors include the length of time since the last QCR was performed, the results of previous QCRs, including the number of findings, maybe any repeat issues they may have had, the results of the prior audited financial statements, and other factors that are typically based on the IPAs or the grantees themselves. So that can include maybe the number of extension requests that have been made to the OIG to submit their audit, or whether an IPA is new to a particular grantee. So, like the selection process, the actual QCR is somewhat intricate as well. Once the grantees and the IPAs have been selected, we issue notification letters to everyone. The contractor who will ultimately conduct the review will then reach out to the IPA. They'll schedule a virtual or an on-site visit. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the visits were typically conducted in person and on-site at the IPA's location. Since then, we've shifted to more of a hybrid approach, offering the opportunity to conduct the reviews, sometimes safely, a bit faster, and in a way that's most convenient for everyone's current workplace policies. One thing we'd like to note here is that there may be a lag in timing between the notification letter from the OIG to the time that the contractor reaches out to schedule the actual visit. This is largely due to how we coordinate the scheduling, travel arrangements, and other planning logistics that occur behind the scenes. Once the review is completed, the contractor issues a report to the OIG. We review that report and additional questions or discussions might occur as the OIG evaluates the results of that review. Once the OIG has reviewed the contractor's report, we transmit that report to the IPA and the LSC grantee. If any issues are noted, we provide recommendations and, if warranted, indicate whether corrective action is required before we close the QCR. In those particular instances, we evaluate the corrective action and issue a formal and usually final notice of the results. In very rare cases, if it's determined that an audit has not been performed in accordance with standards, or if corrective action doesn't seem to satisfactorily address the QCR issues, the OIG has the authority to debar, suspend, or remove IPAs or IPA firms from performing audit services of LSC recipients. Of course, this is never something that we really, wish to execute. It's though actually just something that is in accordance with Part 1641 of the LSC regulations. And it's truly with the intent of making sure that LSC's grantees receive acceptable audits. So now that we've given you a sense of how both the desk review and quality control review processes work, let's dig into the results of the latest round of QCRs. They were conducted of fiscal years 2022 and 23. And with that, I am going to pass the presentation to Andrew.
Thank you, Portia. So as Portia noted, the most recent batch of QCRs were performed on fiscal year 2022 and 2023 audits. We conducted 35 QCRs of those audits. And as you can see in this graph, we had a variety of different results. We identified audits that met standards with no exceptions, which was about 31%. And we also found audits that did have some exceptions. Some did not require corrective action or additional work. That made up about 46%. These were just recommendations for future audits of the grantees. However, about 23% did require additional work. And so what I want to talk about now are the most common findings and the most common causes of this additional work, so that in the future, this can be streamlined and that perhaps there won't be as much follow-up needed. So some general observations. One thing that we would like to just keep everybody on top of mind is that we occasionally encountered audits where it appeared that the IPA prepared most or sometimes all of the financial statements. This contradicts audit standards, which dictate that the financial statements should reflect management's representations. So to adhere to standards, IPA involvement in the preparation of the financial statements must be disclosed in the report and documented in the audit work papers. Next slide, please. So speaking of documentation, this is going to be like the prevailing theme for the rest of this presentation is documentation. Most findings that required corrective action were due to IPAs not performing the suggested audit procedures or performing them, but not providing adequate supporting documentation. Please keep in mind that LSC grantees are unique entities, and their audits need to follow both the LSC OIG audit guide and the compliance supplement. If a compliance supplement audit procedure is not performed because the IPA deemed it was not direct and material, then that determination should still be documented in the audit work papers. Also, just one more note for the compliance supplement. Please keep in mind that we did revise the compliance supplement in 2023, and it includes new parts and suggested audit procedures related to both property, 1631, and bonding requirements, Part 1629. So generally, we have some recommendations. Oh, I'm sorry, to address these recurring issues. such as emphasizing the importance of understanding LSC's unique program structure. We also encourage IPAs to thoroughly evaluate the recipient's compliance with LSC and OIG guidance and to adequately document their conclusions. And so next, these are the most common areas that we found that lacked adequate review and required some sort of follow-up. So of the 35 QCRs, 49%, almost half, had some deficiencies related to a review of matters. 17% of the 35 had some deficiencies related to carryover funds, and 11% had deficiencies related to property. We'll get into each of these subjects in a little more detail in the following slides. So first, matters. Matters are one of those terms that are somewhat unique to the LSC environment. The main thing to keep in mind is the definition of matters. The federal regulations define matters as activities that support program services without involving direct legal advice or representation. We found that some IPAs used case file test work as their primary review of matters. However, based on the definition of matters, matters would not be found in the case files because they do not involve representation. Typically, there are items such as outreach, public education, and some other areas. So to better review matters, we recommend that IPAs strengthen their understanding of matters in the LSC grantees environment and test that coverage accordingly. A review of matters should include reviewing these program activities to ensure that they fall within the recipient's written priorities and to document the results of these evaluations. Next, carryover funds. As most of you may know, LSC permits grantees to carry over up to 10% of their annualized support from one year to the next. However, we noted frequent miscalculations in the prior year carryover amounts and misunderstandings around revenue recognition tied to these funds. So to address this, we advise IPAs to thoroughly verify not only the prior year carryover amount, so the amount of carryover in the year before the fiscal year being audited. Determine if the 10% threshold was exceeded. If so, the IPA should determine if LSC approval was obtained in the form of a waiver. If a waiver was granted, the IPA should also verify compliance with the terms of the waiver and ensure separate accounting for the carryover amount. And as with all of these, please be sure to adequately and thoroughly document this in your audit work papers. Revenue recognition, I won't go too deep into because Meliza covered a lot of that very thoroughly in her section. But please keep in mind that LSC has issued updated guidance in the form of Program Letter 23-2 in 2023 about revenue recognition. And compliance with this program letter is mandatory. You can find a link to the program letter at the end of the slide deck. And then finally, property. And again, this is one of the new or the more thoroughly updated sections of the new compliance supplement. We found that some IPAs did not adequately review compliance with LSC's property management requirements. So we recommend that a review is documented that includes a review of the acquisition of property obtained with LSC funds, the use of LSC funds to make capital improvements, an inspection of LSC-funded property, and disclosure of LSC-funded property in the audit reports. Also, I can say that in the current batch of QCRs that we're doing now, we found a few issues where IPAs did not check to see if the grantees had performed an inventory in the last 2 years. This is also another step in the compliance supplement. So please, along with that and all the other steps, make sure that these are being completed and thoroughly documented in the work papers. These items underscore the importance of adherence to standards in LSC audits, from ensuring management represents the financial statements to accurately documenting procedures and addressing specific compliance areas. Our goal is to minimize corrective actions and improve audit quality. Please feel free to reach out to me or Portia at any time if you have questions on the QCRs. Thanks, and with that, I'll hand it back to you, Portia.
Thank you, Andrew. So we'll wrap up the presentation today by sharing this list of resources. They're not only critical to informing your audits, but will hopefully be instrumental in building your understanding and your familiarity with LSC for those of you who are fairly new to the organization, as well as the unique needs and requirements of their grantees. The copy of the presentation we shared should have links embedded within the slide, but all of these are actually pretty easy to find on the OIG's website, as well as LSC's website. And I suppose with that, thank you, everyone. That actually concludes our presentation this afternoon. I'm going to pause for a second. I'll stop the recording here.